bio. I have been told that, when I do the bio, you can hear some clicking. I'll try to keep the clicking down, but I've got a variety of interesting quotes in different windows right here that are going to go. So Psychedelic FURS they're such an interesting season 3 band, guys, because they're like a bingo card of different stuff. So first of all, their name was inspired by an artist that we covered several times. Were you able to take a guess? This is going to be difficult for you to pull, but do you have any idea where their name came from?
From a band that we covered already?
Mm-hmm.
Psychedelic FURS.
In the 60s and 70s.
Hendrix?
Good guess, but no.
I don't know.
They were inspired by the 1966 Velvet Underground song Venus in Furs. Yep, which was in there.
I know, we should have just said that. Either them or the Sex Pistols.
So, bingo card entry number 1.
Yep.
Number 2 is Richard Butler, one of the 2 Butler brothers in the band. Tim Butler was the bassist, was inspired to form the Psychedelic FURS after he saw Who in 1977 in England.
The Sex Pistols.
If you guessed the Sex Pistols, you are correct, my friend. So it's like I said, there's a bingo card element. They're also a 1977 band that largely formed without too much training and became a band that was often identified as being one of the forerunners of post-punk, like one of the first bands that got that label as what they were, right? But then later were also viewed as like synth pop, and they also had some interesting things that we really haven't covered yet, but I'm sure will be the next post-punk, which is college rock, right? We haven't really gotten into that whole thing.
I'm starting to think that that the Sex Pistols are responsible for more bands than the Velvet Underground. Like I
think that they're the same. They're just 10 years apart.
We're just hitting all the Sex Pistols ones now. Yeah.
Well, one was 66 and one was 77. And they lived a parallel life. They both basically came and just like inspired the next, 10 to 15 years of rock. And there's like a secondary band, and that's it. Like, the Clash probably are the secondary band behind the Sex Pistols, right? That did that same thing. And I think with the Velvet Underground, probably it's the Beatles, right? That like, if you weren't being inspired by the Velvet Underground, you'd be inspired by the Beatles.
Well, who's after that? Is it Nirvana? Are they the next ones to really like? I don't know.
I mean, Nirvana gets name checked a lot, but I don't hear their sound in anything that came the next 15 years. So I'd have to think about that, who it would be. It's probably not even rock anymore. It's probably some others. Because, Chuck Berry is the equivalent in the 50s, right? Or Little Richard. Chuck Berry and Little Richard were who everybody sort of copied after that to create rock and roll.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so there you go. So there are some things that are similar about the Psychedelic FURS background. Of course, the Psychedelic FURS released this album, Talk, 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 in 1981. I thought it was interesting that there is a famous band named Talk, Talk in the 80s as well. And this album's Talk, 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 but that's very different. We'll cover them later. But this was from 1981. The band was formed in 1977. The original band members were Richard Butler on vocals, Tim Butler on bass, saxophone player Duncan Kilburn, and guitarist Roger Morris. They formed and began playing pretty regularly. Most notably, they got a pretty high-profile session on a guy by the name of John Peel. We've talked about him a while back in the early 70s. He had a show on Radio 1, a British show that he would sort of showcase artists, and the Psychedelic FURS played on it, and this led to them being signed by Epic Records. And when they get signed on Epic Records, they take the 4 there and they add drummer Vince. I want to say, I saw it as Eli, but knowing my luck, it'll be Ellie. It's Ely, so I apologize in advance. I'll continue to... I was checking all over for the pronunciation, but couldn't find it. So I tried to do my homework. And then John Ashton, another guitarist. I was curious as to whether he was related to the Ashtons of the Stooges, right? But different spelling. There was an E in the Stooges. One's not here, and he was definitely not part of it. So they get a single on the radio called We Love You in 1979. They have another single that was called Sister Europe in 1980. And then they released their debut album, that was produced by Steve Lillywhite, who also produces this album. So there's another CTS bingo card.
Yeah.
Maybe Steve Lillywhite will be getting into that CTS Hall of Fame discussion because he's starting to
on his
pop
way.
up more and more.
Yeah.
So yeah, he did their first album that was self-titled, Psychedelic FURS, and it ended up in the top 20 in the UK. It did not do as well in the US. They were more of a UK phenomenon. 81's Talk 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 was also very successful in the UK. Both Dumb Waiters and Pretty in Pink were highly charting singles, and this one actually reached the US top 100. What I think was also interesting was their third album, which we're not going to cover, but just to give you an idea, was produced by Todd Rundgren, another CTS
Josh's
Hall of Fame
favorite
producer. Yep. So as a producer though, he was turning it out, and we talk about Brian Eno and stuff. Todd Rundgren has produced all kinds of different. He did Frampton Comes Alive and Meatloaf's album, and then this. He was producing basically anything, and it all sounds different. So I gotta give him a shout out. You may not have liked the album we covered, but what was the album? Something. Anything or something. I'm trying to. I apologize. I'm doing it off the top of my head right there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the six of them were there, and that's a little bit of the general overview of what was going on. This was an attempt to make the Psychedelic FURS sound more poppy. I think was sort of their goal from the self-titled album to this one, and interestingly enough, like the Psychedelic FURS kept going on and then kind of had a second, wave of popularity. And, they in the US, they got into the top 200 on this album, and then their other albums sort of were released but really didn't chart in the top 100. They were kind of like a traditional indie, I guess what we would call an indie band, but that was being generated as an idea there, right? And then John Hughes makes Pretty in Pink, right? And then this song becomes the song that scores the name of the song.
Oh, so that inspired. That's what I was going to wonder. Like, what came? I guess that's because this is 81. So the song inspired the title of the movie. Is that what happened?
Well, and if you've ever seen Pretty in Pink and then you read the lyrics of Pretty in Pink, there is some overlap. It's not exactly the same, right? There's different, but there's element. And if you noticed, a lot of the Psychedelic FURS songs are sort of about adolescence and love, and a lot of their songs kind of come from the idea of like the female perspective a little bit at times. I don't know how much you guys paid attention to the lyrics at different. I know Matt.
John, you know how much I paid attention to the lyrics. Come on.
You really should though, because it does
I know
stuff. But yes, you would not ask that question if you read it, because you'd see that there were some coming of age type themes in that. So yeah, I think I'm gonna end there. The band would continue until 1991 when they would break up, and like many bands, of course, they come back in the early 2000s for a reunion tour, and they still periodically make music. In fact, they released an album on July 31st, 2020, and it was actually well regarded. It was actually in a lot of publications' best albums lists, including Mojo and Uncut, and ABC's Good Morning America as well. Which I thought was funny. So, but yeah, no, it wasn't like
Michael Strahan has good taste.
Yep, and they're touring as of September 1st, 2021. They were doing it. So, yeah, and the current band still has the Butler brothers in it, but no other original members. The rest of the members of the band, one joined in 1983, one joined in 2002, one in 2009, and one in 2021. But they are still playing roughly the same instruments, except Amanda Kramer who's been in the band since 2002, is credited with keyboards, which was something that was not a part of the band at this stage in Talk Talk Talk. So there we go. That's a little bit of an overview. Josh, I'm going to give you the first word. Thoughts on the Psychedelic FURS Talk Talk Talk?
Well, another pleasant surprise this week. I really like this album. I really only knew Pretty in Pink and another song which I think is on their next album, Love My Way, which is really good. I really like this album. I thought they have the singer has a really interesting vocal delivery. He's kind of got a flatness. He's almost like talk singing at times to it. The kind of standout thing that I'm sure you guys will mention is the saxophone. That's a key component to their sound, and I thought that was used in an interesting and effective way throughout the songs. I think the first side is pretty much perfect. I really loved all of those songs, the first 5 from the US track listing. I guess it would be Pretty in Pink through She Is Mine, but Pretty in Pink's such a standout song, but then Mr. Jones is such like kind of an upbeat rock song that is really good. And they also have some really effective or not effective but catchy choruses as well. I thought Dumbwaiter, the third track, kind of starts out like kind of a higher pitched sound or volume, and there's a little noise rock element in it with the horns coming in, and then later on the flip side, it goes on, has a really cool drum and guitar solo in kind of the middle of the track before it picks up again. And I did not listen to the lyrics as much on this one, but I really enjoyed singing along to the songs. And again, kind of like the Go-Go's, just really effective songcraft here. I thought the saxophone was used effectively, and I appreciated that kind of unique element to the band. And I really liked, overall, it was just another pleasant surprise for me.
Josh, did you listen to the U.S. version of this?
Yeah, that was the track listing on Amazon Music.
Oh,
yeah, I listened to the UK version just for reference.
So did I.
Okay.
Because so you listen on Amazon. Yeah, on Spotify, it's just the UK version. So, I think anyway. But yeah, I like this a lot. Go ahead.
It looks like it's all the same songs, just different order.
Just different order. Like Dumbwaiter starts the UK one. You said it was the third track on the US one. Okay, gotcha.
So I guess they're still doing this in the 80s, huh? Well,
yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know what like Americans like songs like this and British people like songs.
Is it like they front load the hit? One of the, I think it might be in America, they try to put the singles higher in the sequence.
Yeah.
And I think in the UK, there's the original. It's usually the British acts change it in American audience as opposed to the other way, from what I remember.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like right. That's right. But I like this too. I only knew Pretty in Pink on this record. So, and I knew Love My Way as well. So I always knew of them, but again, didn't really ever get into them or know anybody that was really into them. I actually knew Butler's side project, Love Spit Love, better than this because I actually own one of their albums. So, and there's some really good stuff on that. This album from '94. But this is great. Yeah, Josh, you hit it. Noise rock is definitely something that came out, because this is it's interesting that this was more of a pop direction. There's definitely that there, but there's a lot of edge here. There's a lot of distortion. There's a lot of, kind of off-kilter sounds. The saxophone in particular is unique kind of a thing that they're doing. It's certain. Sometimes I'm like, sometimes the saxophone sounded like it might have been a guitar with a certain type of filter that they're running through the amp or something like that. But it's clear that this is a saxophone. That there is a saxophone throughout many of these songs, and that adds like an interesting layer to this. I really do like Butler's voice. It's a very British voice. It's one of those British voices that you can actually tell is British when he's singing. I always thought that was interesting. A lot of British artists, when they sing, it's almost like they lose some of the fastball of their accent. It kind of gets blends in together. But there's plenty of
even the Beatles, you can't really
for sure. I mean, every now and then there'll be a word or something like that. But with Richard Butler here, it sounds like throughout most of the songs and all the lyrics that he's singing, and maybe that is because he's talking more. I can't say that he's got a crisp, clean musical voice. It's a voice that really complements the music that they're playing well, because it's very raspy, but it's cool. It really works well here. So I think my favorite song on here that I didn't know before, which was All of This and Nothing, I thought that was just a really cool It's kind of an intro, like a acoustic guitar intro, and it goes into this really cool drum beat. There's some cool drumming on here. I really like some of the stuff that they're doing, that the guy's doing with like the hi-hat to kind of, on the offbeat, that's prominent in that song at least. And then that had a really good chorus as well that was just really stuck in my head.
He's not keeping the time almost ever on these songs with the drumming.
Yeah, but it just fits well there. It's like he's doing his own
I agree.
thing.
I'm just saying that's kind of the style, yeah.
Yeah, and I just noticed in that song in particular, I'm like, man, I really like how the hi-hat's kind of like how he's clamping down on that hi-hat to kind of accentuate the beat. So yeah, it's a lot of the overall sonic palette is kind of very similar from one song to the next, but they all have their own elements that kind of make them a little bit unique. So I would like to listen to this a bit more. I will say I didn't listen to these albums as much this week as I normally do. I was away and just wasn't a focus of what I've been doing the last couple of weeks. But I've probably listened to this record 3 times or so, and I really do like it. It's another one of those post-punk albums that's just, man, early '80s stuff is really doing well so far for me. So I'm thumbs up here. I'm glad we covered this, and I know a little bit more about them now. So it's good stuff.
What's the track where they go like ha 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 in the background? I think it's She Is Mine. I think that was I really like that.
And that was a good song. That closes out, I guess, the UK version. But I thought that was kind of good. They do a good job. It's not all of them, because that song is a little bit more. I don't want to say it's a ballad, but it's less edgy, I would say, than a lot of the other tracks on here. It's kind of got a more of a melodic thing. So they do that well too. And so that was a good. I kind of liked the sequencing of the UK version fairly. I thought that was done pretty well.
Yeah, I think their lyrics they're a bit morose. They're kind of in that Cure vein. I think a little bit contemplative, but there's some edge there too.
Well, he wants to sleep with people,
right? Well, yes,
and go in them like a train.
yeah.
But that's not the last thing. That this isn't a sexed up album. There's a lot of like romance and stuff like that as well.
Love Lost or Love Lost.
I have to disagree with you, Matt. I actually don't think this album is samey sounding at all. I think the only thing that ties it together sonically is Richard Butler's voice. And if you take Richard Butler's voice out, the way the drums are being utilized and the song structures, I thought were varied all over the place. Like a song like No Tears is this extremely cacophonic sort of explosion of sound. It's a very frantic song. Like it's weaving in and out. It's fast paced. It's loud. The percussion is exactly what you hear. It's percussed, right? It's like a driving percussion. Pretty in Pink is a more deliberate song that builds to a defined chorus. There's some stuff at the end of this that sounds like She Is Mine almost sounds like what college rock is going to sound like. I mean, it wouldn't be out of place in like a REM album, I'd say. Into You Like a Train is a little bit more like a slowed down Stooges song. And then, Dumb Waiters is a very interesting sonic scape. And I thought there was someone said Mr. Jones like a more traditional rock song. I would agree with that. There's a song on here. I think it might be It Goes On, that almost sounds like an E Street Band song with the saxophone kind of being used in the front, kind of like Clarence in the E Street Band. It's not exact corollaries, but I think it's drawing from. This is another one of those albums we sometimes talk about where there's clear things from the past, right, that are in here, and that's sort of, I think I get like a little bit of a psychedelic vibe, as you see in the name, but also things like the Velvet Underground, what they were doing, but also the Stooges I hear a lot in here. I hear a lot of 70s pop, pop rock type music, but buried under what would eventually become, like you guys said, like noise rock. Now, they're not going abrasive noise rock, but there's songs where it's a wall of sound at different times. Now, the wall of sound, though, is coming as much from the drums as the guitars, which separates it from, Sonic Youth-y type noise rock, right, where it's mostly coming from like the guitar sounds and the effects. Yeah. There's drumming, but it's a different type of sound. But and then there were elements of what I mentioned college rock, I think for the first time in CTS podcast, right? Like we really haven't used the term college rock to this point. We've kind of used post-punk, I think, as a descriptor, but we're going to start reconciling with these terms that are going to come in the 80s and 90s, right? Things like college rock and indie rock and alternative and shoegaze and like all of these different terms, right? And so there's elements of all of those here that it's leading to. And I was somewhat familiar with the Psychedelic FURS, like individual songs. I remember the song Alice's House, which I really like, which is on a later album. And there's just a variety of songs that over the years I've become aware of, but I couldn't have told you anything about any of their albums because I never sat and listened to an album, not out of not wanting to hear it, but just there's only so much time in the day, right? Type stuff. And so that's why I'm glad I revisited this, because I think this is going to be one of these albums that right now it's helping to create the palette, and then later when we get to say 84, 85, 86, we're going to be calling it back and go, it kind of reminds me of that Psychedelic FURS sound, because I feel like this band is going to be influential in a lot of the music we're going to listen to later in the 80s, but we just don't know necessarily what it is yet, because some of the bands that might have been influenced, like we don't know as well, if that makes sense. And so I like this album. Richard Butler's voice is the one thing which is tough for me sometimes, because it is a little samey, but the variety of the music is really what I focused on. I kind of listened to it like you, Matt, this time. I was much more the background music oriented. I think I go to drums maybe. I think Josh does too sometimes, but I think Matt sometimes goes to guitar first, right? And I think I always go to drums and bass first, is what I always hear first. And this was a very interesting drums album because there's rolling fills at different times, and then there's rolling drums that aren't fills. It's most of the time, it's not offbeats, but sometimes there are. It's not consistently offbeats, but offbeats are utilized. As Matt said, there's hi-hats on this. There's also different strike combinations within the same song, or even in the different choruses, which I appreciated. And then at times there's just the pounding of the drums, the percussive sound, and I like how it kept me on my toes. So and it's a very well recorded album. It's the second straight album that sounds there. We talked about the 70s production sound. We were doing some of these 70s albums. The 80s already is having a cleaner, polished sound that, to be honest, this is the first time albums are starting to sound what we would call modern, I think, in a 2022 lens. Yeah, and it's becoming more and more noticeable as we get to the early 80s right now. So
I think, and I think the saminess. I think the saminess that I think you're right. I think definitely Butler's voice, but is maybe some of the saminess that I was hearing. But I think it's the production. I just, because I was getting a lot of there's a lot of sounds happening, and it's very it's edgy. The saxophones kind of got a similar sound throughout the album, and it's full, right? These are full. Most of these songs are full. They're using all the the tracks, if you will, that they might, whatever track that they're recorder that they're using here. So I think it was more of that, and I think that that's what I was drawn into upon the first these couple of listens that I gave it, which further listening would probably help me to differentiate songs better, or being able to kind of pick those things out. But I think that that's kind of what I was referring to more. But like I said, I still think that there were other elements that were coming out. It's not like, oh, this is the same song over and over again. It's certainly an interesting record. I was not getting bored with it, but I think the overall sonic nature of it was a little in that lane, which is fine. That wasn't to take anything away from it, but it was a noticeable approach to how they were recording the record, and it worked. It sounded cool.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think his voice is distinct, even if it's the same.
Sure.
Well, now I will know. Anytime I hear "Pretty in Pink," I'll know associate with Psychedelic FURS, because that's kind of a unique sounding voice. But yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? This was another one. I don't think we did the did we do the numbers on this, John?
We did not. I'm sorry. What would it be, a John segment without me?
I know.
To do the numbers?
Well, I usually catch you, and I didn't know this time. So anyway, this is their highest rated album, because I was just thinking, are we going to cover? I don't think we're covering them again. So
we are not. No.
This is our highest rated album. It's number 312 of the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 30 in 1981, and number 1,968 of all time. It did not make Rolling Stone's list. The only album tonight that did not make Rolling Stone's list.
Yeah, so. I'll give you. Matt, did you own the Clueless soundtrack?
I didn't. My sister did, so I heard I heard that soundtrack through her. Yeah.
I'll give you a good example of how I think it could be later. There was a song called "I Need You Around" on that by the Smoking Popes, and sort of the singer is like, "And I want you to be in my world," that talk sing, and like that sounded like the Psychedelic Furs, right? And I'm like, interesting.
Yep.
And that's what I'm getting at. There's sort of like, I just thought of that, right? And I'm like, who kind of sounds like this singing voice, and there's a little Lou Reed in his singing voice, isn't there, in terms of what he's going for, I think.
Yeah,
I think that would be, I mean, if they're influenced by the Velvet Underground, why wouldn't he try and...
Well, even if I didn't know, it sounds like Lou Reed a little. And a lot of guys are trying to sound like Lou Reed now. I feel like he's kind of becoming, who a lot of people, the lane that they're going for. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, thumbs up.
Yep.
Same.